Hello, and welcome to the Math Education Matters podcast. I am so excited for our guest today, Dr. India White. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Kwashanda. Very delighted to be on this podcast with all you rock stars today.
You're welcome. So, again, hello and welcome to the Math Education Matters podcast, where I discuss matters happening in mathematics education, mathematics teacher education, and mathematics education research. I am your host, Dr. Kwashanda Kudaisi, founder of Math Education Matters, which is a website containing resources that will support mathematics educators in the areas of curriculum, instruction, and research. We're also a community of almost 5,000 members from all over the world, and now a podcast that will help us all to grow professionally. I am so excited to have on the show. So I'm going to give you a little bit about her background before I allow her to share. Now, brace yourself because this is a lot. We have a busy lady here, so I'm so honored to have her. So Dr. India White is a TEDx speaker, motivational speaker, life coach, author, national education consultant, entrepreneur, mentor, and a licensed minister. Praise the Lord.
That's right.
Audiences learn from her hardships and triumphs in life. As a former homeless student, she was kicked out of the house on Christmas Eve at the age of 16. India is a 3-time graduate from the University of Florida, majoring in math and education, leadership, and educational leadership and administration. She was named Teacher of the Year in 2 counties while publishing 40+ books and was a 2022 Gators 40 Under 40 honoree. Dr. India has shared her talents with superintendents, principals, math leaders, and educational consultants with a strength in equity, diversity, and inclusion. She has held positions as a math teacher, assistant principal, national education consultant, instructional math coach, and co-author for Big Ideas Learning, a K-12 math textbook publishing company. India's mission is to find out how to use equitable practices in math classrooms to bridge the achievement gap. Dr. White has presented across the globe on equity, diversity, and inclusion. Some of the platforms Dr. White has presented for include the National Council for Teachers of Math, the National Alliance of Black School Educators, Tennessee Math Council, Virginia Math Council of Teachers of Math, the International Academic Forum, and Wisconsin Math Council. Dr. White currently holds leadership positions, which include the Equity and Access Chair for the Florida Council of Teachers in Math. She is also the Vice President of the Alachua County Council of Teachers of Mathematics. As a trainer and a TEDx speaker, Dr. White has been privileged to work with leaders in legislation, in the Department of Education, and throughout various organizations. And so, as you can see, that was a mouthful, and I don't even think we've covered it all. But if I kept talking, I feel like we would take the rest of the time for the podcast. But that's a little bit about our guest today, Dr. White. So, Dr. White, if you can include just a little bit more that I haven't said about yourself, feel free to do that.
Well, I'm just grateful to be here, and I just, I'm thankful for the tribe that I've had that has supported me. I am a single parent of 2 beautiful children, my daughter Shekinah and my son Asa, who are middle school and elementary school students. In addition, I'm also a speaker and also an author for National Geographic Learning to Engage, and I'm super excited to join that team as I write on equitable practices in education. And I love to garden and I love going to the beach. So those are some little things about me I like to share.
Nice. Well, you're definitely in a state where you can go to the beach a lot.
Yes.
So Dr. White currently lives in Florida. And so I think we can dive right into some of the questions that I have for you that I think
Okay.
will be beneficial for our audience. So my first question is, um, what is your connection to mathematics? So because I know you do a lot, right? You're in the equity space, you're in the leadership space, you've been an assistant principal, but what is your connection to mathematics itself, mathematics education?
So for my whole journey with mathematics started actually, I first fell in love with math when I was a homeless student. And I remembered my youth pastor was telling me that I would be homeless for the next 2 years of high school. And while he was telling me that, I was actually chucking out some pre-calculus problems and having a blast.
Mm.
And math was my go-to. It was my therapy at that time in my life. It was what kind of got me through the hard times. And I figured it out. And I sensed that people all over society didn't quite have the same love that I had for math. They didn't really have the same passion. And I even had, people come in my life and tell me that I was not competent and I would not be able to do it. But it was through just constantly having that grit and that determination to say, no matter what, I'm going to understand this and I'm going to fall in love with it myself. And that's exactly what happened. So now, as a co-author for Big Ideas Learning, I inspire to write to help teachers to not only love math, but to help students love math. And I do that through helping them to connect, equitable practices and connect their culture and to connect, different things, whether it's like socio-emotional tips and also tips about how to just activate and cultivate grit in the lives of students all over this nation. So I'm thankful to be able to take on that part of my assignment to really keep it real with teachers, because when you're at after school and you're tempted to go to happy hour and talk about those tough areas, and you don't know how that kid is going to really get through in your math class, I want to help all teachers to eliminate those conversations and to really find solutions. So that's one connection I have to math. And then, of course, just being able to help people understand from various backgrounds how neat math is and their purpose when they're in a math classroom, and how to really make the dots connect, and then how to help leaders to motivate students to go above and beyond no matter what.
Thank you for sharing that. So you talked a little bit about in your response, some of those people who told you that you couldn't do it. What I'm interested in is what about those people who encouraged you? What did your teachers do in the classroom that cultivated that love for math that you had? And what were some of the practices that you would encourage current math teachers to do to support equitable mathematics learning and instruction?
That's a wonderful question. And I automatically think of my teacher, Miss Wilson, who, she doesn't mind me blasting her. I'm actually friends with her on Facebook, after all these years. But she was my high school teacher, and she taught me pre-calculus. She taught me college algebra. And, she really supported me even my first year of, college at the University of Florida. She really was there for me. And she's still in my life today. Some things that Miss Wilson did was she was very consistent, and she was very strict but loving at the same time. So in our class, she actually had like a Kagan structure, and Kagan wasn't even out at the time, but she
Mhm.
had Kagan structure where she had us in groups of 4, and she would, assign us the problems to work on, and then she would check for understanding. She would walk around and hear us. She grouped me with some very intelligent students, and I was not really that confident in my ability of understanding math. But my friends, who are now all surgeons, then we were all in that group together, hanging out and whatnot. She would constantly come over and just provide that motivation of, okay, keep going, let's keep going. We've got 10 minutes, let's keep going. And she would check our work. I loved how she checked the quality of work. You couldn't just put down an answer and just no. She was going to get you, and you knew she was going to get you. So you did your best to make sure you showed your level of proficiency, so that you would please her and that she knew that you really, belonged in that class. Also, she created an environment where it was a healthy competition among each other. Back in those days, she would put the test down and we would see our test results. And I remembered if I saw I had an 88%, and then I would look over my neighbor, they had a 93%, 96%. I started feeling like, oh, I need to get it together here. So she kind of created a culture where it really didn't tolerate any bullying, but it just really kind of kept you on your toes as a student. Like, I need to hang in there or else I'm going to be drowning in this class and I'm not going to look good to my peers. So it was kind of like a flip on the peer pressure where it was a motivated peer pressure. You wanted to fit in with the super smart kids and you wanted to have at least A's or B's. She constantly talks about, opportunities for advanced courses, taking honors or AP, and we wanted to be an AP Calc. You know what I mean? So we did what we could to be an AP Calc from her pre-calc class. And so, I honor her for that because she really just kind of stimulated an interest in a desire to be the best in her classroom.
I love that. So what I heard you say was the teacher promoted consistency. She was strict, but also loving. She created an environment where constructive learning could take place, but it sounds like y'all were in groups, y'all were talking to each other. And then feedback, like she walked around, she gave feedback to students. Yeah, I knew that she would be coming around to listen. So it sounds like she wasn't just, up at her desk and
Right.
threw out a worksheet and said work on it and then class was over, but it sounded like there was some engagement and interactive learning taking place in the classroom, and then competition and making sure that no bullying is happening. The piece about the no bullying really stands out to me because I think one of the foundational pieces of building a classroom environment is really building a classroom community where students build relationships with one another, right? Because what we see sometimes in the classroom, especially in my experience when I was a math coach, is that a lot of times it's the teacher talking to the student, but you don't
Right.
really see those relationships being built among peers around the mathematics. Of course, they're talking to
Exactly.
each other, right? But like
Right.
how would you say that teachers could build those mathematical communities where students learn and then interact and engage together?
Exactly. So definitely working on mathematical discourse, creating an environment where that discourse is healthy and they're climbing up that Bloom's taxonomy ladder and
Mm-hmm.
having that metacognition flow and passing it one to another. That's going to definitely take an environment where there's been respect and there's been modeling of that from the teacher, kind of modeling at the beginning of the year and modeling throughout the year what healthy conversations are like. Sometimes students also don't know how to really initiate that conversation. They don't know how to really dive in and ask the right questions. So having a teacher really provide like Bloom's taxonomy math stems. You can Google it and find them.
I
Where
will
you have
include
different
that in the show
questions.
notes.
Yes,
Yeah.
where you have like math STEM questions of how did you arrive at that problem? What steps are next here? Or can you create this? Analyze this and you're really embedding the content also within having students like if you do like role play and you set the students up in groups of 4, even working together, and you allow students to take turns. Okay, you ask question 1, your question 2, your question 3, your question 4. We go around every fourth question you get, and you build an environment where they automatically know the rules and the norms and procedures. And you also talk about those norms at the beginning. So we're not going to use certain names. We're not going to do name calling. We're not going to tear each other down. If you get upset, feel free to walk away. You can even use for talking. So if the numbering system doesn't work, you can use like little red chips and yellow chips where, if it's on red, you don't talk. If it's on yellow, that person talks. And you just hold that up and you implement that with fidelity and the students won't bend from it. Okay. And then if you see that there's a group of students that is doing, exactly what you've aspire for them to do, compliment them, call them out, praise them, let them have their moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we do that as educators, I think that's what's really going to cultivate an environment of learning. And then also, what's wrong with having students compliment each other? There were times I would take a group of students and I would say, okay, guys, look, y'all did fabulous. I want you to turn to your neighbor and tell them you did a great job today and tell them something specifically that they did that was great in your group work today.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I would have students go out and they had to intentionally find someone else and tell them something good about what they did, their quality of work, building an environment of a sense of belonging and an environment where students really knew that they were valued and that those relationships are strong and beautiful relationships that could last even outside of the classroom.
Awesome, awesome. So, Dr. White, you're really getting at an important point here, and one of my foundational sort of philosophies as a teacher, and that's procedures, right? You talk about
Yes.
preparing students to know what to expect in your classroom, right?
Right.
I was one of those teachers that had a very structured classroom, but a very loud classroom, right?
Right.
But the way that that was able to flow effectively was that students understood the procedures that I had in place, right?
Right.
So we kind of, it was sort of functioning in sort of, chaos, what one
Right.
might see, but it was still a structured environment. And I
Right.
think having those clear procedures really helps with classroom management. It helps with
Yes, it does.
unnecessary behavior problems, right?
Right.
As simple as what is the procedure for turning in homework? What is the
Exactly.
procedure for sharpening the pencil, right? So
Right.
having those things in place can really cut down on what would appear to be behavior problems in the classroom. So I'm glad that you hit on that piece. Um, so another question that I have is directly related to your background there. So as we mentioned earlier, Dr. White was a TEDx speaker in Ocala, and she talked about grit. So can you kind of define what you mean by grit? Because there's a lot of different conceptions of what that means. And so
Right.
could you talk about how you define grit and then talk about the importance of your definition of grit as it applies to the mathematics classroom?
Excellent. So my definition of grit is having great resilience in time. So that means that the more resilience you have over a shorter amount of time, then the more grit you have available, right? Because what happens is if you have 20 minutes to write an essay, you are going to take that resilience and that short amount of time and you are going to drive it so rough and hard because you want to finish, you want to persist. So you got to get it done. The deadline's like, but if you have 3 weeks to finish it, you relax a little bit. So the more amount of time you have, then the less grit you have available because oh, I can relax a little bit. So what happens with students is when they lose sight of, I've got this assignment due at the end of class and they get distracted or whatnot, they don't really tap into their grit. So in order to get them to tap into their grit, goal setting and helping them to become resilient by saying, listen, I know you've got 20 problems due. Okay, at the end of the period, you've got 15 minutes to work on these problems. I want you to finish the first 5 problems in the next 5 minutes. I'm coming around to check. When you do that, that creates that grit, that creates that healthy competition, that creates that motivation, gets their energies going because they know, oh my gosh, my teacher has given me this assignment. I have a goal in mind. You don't have a goal, it's hard to really have grit because you don't have anything to really aspire for. So grit is tied to your purpose. It's tied to a vision. It's tied to something beyond what you currently have. And there aren't any excuses. See, grit takes away whenever students say, I can put that off. That's procrastination. Grit is kind of opposite of that. Grit says you can't procrastinate. It's off the table. You got to get it done now. So when you're dealing with students and you're trying to tap into their grit and cultivate their grit, definitely do that by letting them know the timeline of what you have assigned to them that's due, letting them know that they can do it. See, you got to tap into their passion. You got to motivate them. Students aren't going to necessarily do it just because it's due. You got to tap into their passion. And sometimes you can do that through tying in their culture, tying in different incentives for them so that they know, like, okay, if I get this done, my teacher said we're going to get 5 extra minutes outside, or we're going to get, a treat. We'll be able to have our little math class party. Oh, did I say the word party? But we'll have
It's a
our
party.
class
It's a party.
event, our
It's a party.
statistical acknowledgement event. We'll have a great event where we'll be able to celebrate, each other and how far we've gotten. If you have goals, like say you have a money system, like I used to have a money system. I love those things. I highly recommend it. So if you, and I'm willing to share that with you guys as well, but if you have like a money system, I had it in my class where if the class had $1,000 in their money account, then they would get a behavioral acknowledgement event. I would check it with administration and they would allow it because the kids earned it. Of course they couldn't abuse it. And there was, you can get $20 for, answering a question right. You can get $20 for, helping to clean up around the classroom and cleaning up your area. If you needed to buy a pencil, it was $20. All of that was fake money, by the way. And it was just simply laminated printed money that we created. And it took off. It just really took off. It never failed me. And it's still thriving today for the teachers that are still using it, which is phenomenal. But I say all of that because it was through those incentive programs and systems that we were able to also activate the grit of our learners and really kind of keep them focused and keep them motivated. If you have their focus and you have their motivation and they have a goal, they will persist no matter what.
Thank you. I love that, Dr. White. And I love the idea of tapping into goal setting, right? Because we know the
Yes.
broader implications of that, even as it applies to other classes, and then even when they graduate, as it applies as they go out into college or career or
Right.
business, so that is a awesome thing that I think supports students. And when as I heard you discuss your definition of grit, it made me think of the standards for mathematical practice. So one of
Yes.
the standards for mathematical practice is persevere in problem solving,
Yes. Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so I really see that as the student being able to do just that, right? Like, how do we get
Exactly.
students to continue to persevere, to continue to be resilient, even when they encounter problems that are challenging, right?
Right.
Because I know you, and I'm assuming that when you're saying like you're going to give students math problems, they're going to be challenging questions,
Yes.
right? Like, we
Yes.
want grade level instruction, like you said, moving up on that Bloom's taxonomy triangle is important, right? Because we
Right.
want our students to achieve at high levels. And so
Exactly.
I'm so grateful that you shared that.
Yeah. And,
Um,
I want to add to that regarding the standards for mathematical practices and grit and really, like you said, helping students to achieve. It's imperative that you do have quality questions that you're asking students at various levels on that Bloom's chart. So you don't want to ask only level 1 or even your DOK levels. You don't want to keep everything at level 1. You want to make sure that you are exposing them to challenging math, even if you feel that their grade levels behind and they can't do it. The key is they have to have exposure to that challenging math to really begin to evolve and to start swimming in those higher areas in the math so that they can
mhm,
show you that they're proficient towards the end. And I think that's one thing that teachers are afraid to do is to expose students that are struggling to the higher math. But studies show
mhm.
that if you actually do expose them, that will help them with
Right. So
proficiency.
what I'm hearing is we have to give students the opportunity to
Yes,
learn,
exactly.
right? So we need to close
Exactly.
that opportunity gap.
Exactly.
So thank you for
Perfect.
sharing that. So our time is rounding up. And so I want you to share one last thing with our audience about and I want you to share about what you I want you to share something with the audience, those of us that are first year teachers or that are new to the profession. What advice do you have for them?
So if you are new to the math profession, I want you to get quiet and figure out why you have been called in this season to be a math teacher. This is not something that is easy. It is not something that we're only doing for a paycheck. Okay. Because if it's financially driven, you might be disappointed. This is more of a calling. So if you're a first year teacher, I want you to really do some introspection and ask, what is my true purpose of connecting with all of these students and all of these leaders? Where do I fit at closing the achievement gap? And how can I help learners from all backgrounds to really thrive? And we already know, like I share in my presentations, It's going to take over 200 years to close the achievement gap in the area of math in the United States. And there's a sense of urgency, and we need you. We need phenomenal quality teachers who have grit themselves and are willing to persist no matter what. So get quiet and figure out what is your calling in regards to math, and how can you really help children at the end of the day really turn it around and thrive. So I leave you guys with that.
Thank you so much, Dr. White. Well, we are so excited that we were able to have you as a guest. And one last piece of advice that I would give the audience is that as Dr. White encouraged you to think of ways that we can close the achievement gap, I encourage you to take a first step by closing the opportunity gap, and that is to give students the opportunity to learn mathematics at grade level, and watch, you will see things will change. So thank you so much for listening today. And so I will see you on the next episode of the Math Education Matters podcast. Until next time, remember that math education matters. And as my daddy would say, peace out.